On April 21, 2014, a gang member named Angel attacked a witness on the stand with a pen during a trial. In response, a U.S. Marshal pulled out a gun and shot him dead in the courtroom. This is just one example of extremely bizarre moments that have occurred in the Hall of Justice. Here are 15 more of the craziest court moments of all time. Number 15, Esteban Carpio. On April 17, 2005, Esteban Carpio was being interrogated by Providence Police Detective James L. Allen and another detective about the brutal stabbing of an 85-year-old woman, Marlon Gatta. However, when the second detective left the interrogation room to get water for Esteban, Carpio seized the opportunity to plan his escape. He overpowered Detective Allen, took his gun, and shot him twice, killing him. Keep in mind that this event took place at the Providence Police Headquarters, where there were officers everywhere. After murdering the officer, Esteban jumped out of a third-floor window, landed on the ground, and suffered some injuries, but ultimately escaped. Allen was a 27-year veteran and a beloved officer of the department. A manhunt ensued to find Esteban at any cost. They eventually found him almost an hour after his daring escape and brought him back to the police department for questioning. This was the point where things took a very disturbing turn. On April 18, 2005, the police chief, some of Allen's colleagues, and Esteban's family gathered in court for the arraignment hearing. But the moment Esteban walked through the door, everyone was left speechless. It was simply the most horrifying and traumatizing sight anyone could see. Esteban was forced to wear a protective mask, with his eyes, cheeks, forehead, and cranial region bruised and severely swollen. His family screamed upon seeing him, alleging that the police had beaten him to a pulp in retaliation for Allen's death. And you can't blame them for thinking that way. How does a man go from this to this overnight? He was barely recognizable, and his case instantly drew the attention of the major media outlets. Although the police chief denied that illegal force had been used against him, a state police detective who helped track down Esteban admitted during the trial that he had punched Esteban 3 times in the face, breaking some bones in the process. The FBI also launched an investigation into the matter and concluded that the most significant factor contributing to Esteban's injuries was that he jumped out of the third-floor window. On June 27, 2006, a jury found Carpio guilty of Allen's murder and the stabbing of Marlon Gatta. He was sentenced to life in prison for both crimes. And while Esteban Carpio's case is truly disturbing, nothing can prepare the mind for what this next convict did in the courtroom. Number 14. This was 18-year-old Leonid Grazer, who attempted to escape during his trial for the murder of his sister. The trial took place in a Moscow courtroom in Russia in 2019. Grazer shared an apartment with his sister, and they had what could be called a perfect relationship. But along the way, Grazer blurred the line between reality and hallucination by claiming that Satan possessed him and ordered him to kill her. The neighbors were alarmed when they heard Grazer shouting in a hallway of the apartment building, where his sister's body was later found with multiple stab wounds. When the police were called, Grazer was caught at the crime scene, praying naked over her corpse while drawing demonic symbols on her head using her blood. During the trial, surprised bailiffs watched as Grazer struggled to squeeze his body through a small space in the holding cell. They approached him and asked what he was doing, and he replied, "Nothing." Grazer tried to slide his slim body through a small gap in the ceiling of the holding cell to the building's roof. Everything happened so quickly that he almost got away. They hit his legs with batons, but it wasn't effective enough to bring him down. One of the bailiffs grabbed him firmly by one of his legs, allowing another bailiff to use a taser to bring him down. Once down, Grazer made a full confession, stating that killing his sister was a ritual to rid himself of Satan, who was instructing him on how it should be done. You don't need a fortune teller to tell you that Grazer needed some kind of mental evaluation for what he did in court. Another convict who deserves a mental evaluation for turning a courtroom into a ring is Xiao Angelou. On April 24, 2014, a member of the Tongan Crips gang stood up during his trial, took his lawyer's pen, and jumped on the witness stand to attack a chained fellow gang member. Angelou was in court on charges of assault, conspiracy, robbery, and weapons violations. He was one of 17 people named in the 2010 indictment against Tongan Crip members and was the last defendant in the case to be tried. The previous defendants were sentenced to between 10 and 30 years in prison. Video footage released showed Angelou running toward the witness and leaping with a pen in his right hand. The man jumped back to avoid being struck, while Angelou landed on his feet at the front of the witness stand. A U.S. Marshal shot him 4 times from around the corner. A woman screamed in horror as other law enforcement officers in suits ran toward the witness stand. Angelou's defense attorney ducked under a desk. Angelou was rushed to the hospital but died hours later due to excessive blood loss. But this is where things get interesting. The video was not released to the public because it was controversial. Most people in the courtroom that day believed the U.S. Marshal should not have fired any shots. According to the Angelou family's lawyer, Robert Skye, the U.S. Marshal should not have shot Angelou up to 4 times, given that he was not wielding a weapon. Angelou's parents also filed a wrongful death lawsuit, again claiming that he should not have been shot because it was partially unreasonable, reckless, and constitutionally excessive. But as you might have guessed, the U.S. Marshal was exonerated of all charges, and the FBI even reinstated that he was in good standing for having shot Angelou. Angelou was killed while being tried for assault, and insanity is the right word to categorize what the next defendant did to a judge while being tried for murder. Number 12. Base Webb. Here we go again. This was the moment when the defendant named Base Webb spat at the judge presiding over his trial. On July 31, 2009, Base Webb raped and murdered his girlfriend, Bria Brunovic, right in her home in Siena, Kentucky. Bria was an employee at the Ban County Jail who was 32 years old and wanted to leave her job to start a new career. She had been studying law to become a law enforcement officer in the Department of Homeland Security. However, her boyfriend, Base, interrupted her dreams and left her children motherless. She had only started dating Webb 2 months before the incident, and it's unclear how the couple met. However, given her vocation and his numerous convictions for violent crimes and assaults, it's likely they met while she was at work and Webb was in jail or prison. Speaking of convictions, Webb had been involved in so many that it's crazy he hadn't received the death penalty. He was accused of the deaths of 2 ex-girlfriends and was found guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder for trying to run over a corrections officer and a sheriff's deputy while driving a geo-tracker outside the Penn County Jail in 2009. Additionally, he was found guilty of 3rd-degree assault for spitting in the face of a correctional officer, Roy Compston, in Fire County. Webb spat in his face after they searched his cell for contraband. Jail staff suspected Webb might be hiding broken CDs. He waived his right to a trial after pleading guilty to Bria's murder. If he hadn't, he would likely have received the death penalty. However, the final sentence imposed wasn't much less. Webb was sentenced to 50 years in prison for Bria's murder, another 10 years for spitting at the judge, and finally, a 15-year sentence for again spitting in the face of Officer Compston. And just when you think nothing can top that strange courtroom moment, the next defendant physically attacked the judge for some unsettling reason. Number 11, Melissa Hardwick. On July 13, 2011, a 45-year-old woman from McCreary County named Melissa Hardwick was sentenced to 120 days in jail for contempt of court charges after attempting to attack a judge in family court. She could have caused serious harm to the judge if the bailiffs in the courtroom hadn't restrained her. The judge in question was also a woman named Jennifer Upchurch Edwards. And this is exactly what happened. Hardwick and her ex-husband were in family court for a domestic violence hearing. While Upchurch Edwards was reviewing the documents, Hardwick kept interrupting the proceedings and continued causing disturbances in the courtroom, even when the judge reprimanded her and asked her to be quiet. She made so much noise that the bailiffs began to approach her, but Hardwick didn't stop. While Judge Edwards was in the process of sentencing Hardwick to 10 days in jail, Hardwick attempted to drag her by her robe. 3 bailiffs came to restrain Melissa Hardwick. The judge was unharmed, but Melissa suffered some scratches on her face. The video was posted online and went viral instantly. If TikTok had existed back then, it would have gained even more traction. It was obvious that Melissa acted out of anger, but at the same time, attacking the judge wasn't really the best idea to get a lighter sentence. To put into context how crazy this incident was, one of the court security officers who helped restrain Melissa said he had only seen such an incident in training, never in real life. Not even the most ruthless criminals jumped to attack a damn judge. After Melissa was removed from the courtroom, Edwards informed Hardwick's ex-husband that another judge would be appointed to handle the domestic violence charges. On the other hand, she was charged with third-degree terroristic threatening, intimidating a participant in a legal process, and resisting arrest. Number 10. Adam. On January 4, 2011, that was the state of a Charleston courtroom after two women from South Carolina, Erica Butts and Shanita Cunningham, were sentenced to life in prison for the death of a minor in their care in 2009. The victim, Serenity Richardson, was visiting Erica Butts, her godmother, and Shanita Cunningham, her mother's best friend. Shanita Cunningham was Erica's lover, and they lived together in the Summerfield house. Serenity's mother, Aisha Richardson, was moving from South Carolina to Detroit, so she sent her daughter to live with these women for only 2 weeks, but they accidentally killed her, if that makes any sense. According to their explanation, Serenity had an accident while using the bathroom in their house, which caused both women to beat her mercilessly. They whipped her with a belt and plastic hangers, leaving countless marks all over her body. In the process, she died. When they discovered she was unresponsive, they tried to revive her by pouring water on her face and putting ice on her nose. What were they thinking? I don't know, but by the time paramedics arrived, Serenity was already dead. In August 2011, Erica entered an Alford plea, which simply means she maintains her innocence but acknowledges that taking her case to trial would likely result in a conviction, while Shanita pleaded guilty. But what about the little girl's mother? She was also in court and really couldn't do anything more than feel disappointment and hatred toward herself for trusting Erica to take care of her daughter. This was what the judge said before sentencing both women to life in prison. Erica and Shanita immediately collapsed to the floor after their sentence was read. Meanwhile, Erica's mother had to be physically removed from the courtroom due to her screams in the back. Both women had to be lifted and carried out of the courtroom. Number 9. Calvin Lloyd Griffin. That was Calvin Lloyd Griffith twerking in front of the judge during his hearing in August 2016. A few days before this, Calvin had broken into Miami-Dade County Public Schools, snuck into an open office, and stole car keys. He then drove off with the car from the parking lot. The incident was reported to the police, and the school surveillance footage was used to identify and arrest Griffith. He was later charged with burglary, petty theft, grand theft auto, and trespassing in a school safety zone. But it was during his first court appearance that Griffith decided to twerk. Just minutes before that, Griffith's microphone was turned off after he tried to tell the entire court that he smokes weed and coke. He didn't know his microphone was off, so he kept talking, and when he noticed that the judge presiding over the hearing wasn't paying attention, he started twerking. The courtroom erupted in laughter when the judge, who was unimpressed by his twerking skills, looked in his direction. And besides twerking in court, Griffith shouted that his mother was present in the courtroom. In fact, his mother was there that day, holding a bag of his medication, which he reportedly had stopped taking. His twerking skills didn't get him very far because his bail was set at $18,500, and the judge ordered that he never return to high school. The judge wasn't impressed with Griffith's actions, nor was the next judge when he heard the distasteful words in his courtroom. Number 8. Ronnie O'Neal. That was the moment Ronnie pled guilty to one of the most horrible incidents imaginable on March 18, 2018, in Riverview, Florida. Ronnie O'Neal, 29 years old, committed a series of atrocious acts. He fatally shot his ex-girlfriend Kenyatta Barron before subjecting his daughter Ronivia O'Neal to indescribable violence and finally killing her with an axe. At 11:43 p.m., a woman in apparent agony made a distressing call to 911. While it's not entirely accurate to say that the police ignored the call, 8 long minutes passed before Ronnie himself called back, prompting them to take action. Ronnie, an African American, claimed during his call that he had been attacked by white demons, falsely implicating Kenyatta as the aggressor. He provided his address to the police, who arrived at his apartment at 11:49, just 1 minute after his call. Upon arrival, they discovered Kenyatta unconscious in the yard, his daughter brutally murdered, and Ronnie's son injured with a knife and bleeding profusely. Ronnie proceeded to commit further atrocities by setting his house on fire. It was a horrific and chaotic scene. However, Ronnie did not go quietly. He resisted arrest, forcing the officers to use tasers before they could handcuff and place him in custody. After spending more than 3 years in the Hillsborough County Jail, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, 1 count of arson, and 1 count of resisting a law enforcement officer. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 90 years. It became evident that he would never experience freedom again. The judge, deeply affected by the case and Ronnie's lack of remorse, felt compelled to confront him about the kind of man he had become. In the end, Ronnie's words were chilling, and it's difficult to imagine someone showing so little remorse. Another defendant who displayed similar behavior in court was this guy, T.J. Lane. You've probably seen this video thousands of times on the internet, but what exactly happened there? On February 27, 2012, Chardon High School in Chardon, Ohio, became the tragic scene of a shooting that involved 6 students, 3 of whom died. The perpetrator of this heartbreaking event was a boy named T.J. Lane. Born on September 19, 1994, Thomas Michael, T.J. Lane attended Lake Academy, an alternative school in Ohio that serves students with special needs. On this fateful day, T.J. brought a concealed .22 caliber pistol to school and opened fire on his classmates. On March 1, 2012, Lane was formally charged as an adult with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. T.J. made a shocking gesture by removing his dress shirt to reveal a white t-shirt with the word "killer" handwritten on it. Despite receiving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, he showed a disturbing lack of remorse. He further drew attention by pointing his finger at the victim's parents and making an offensive statement. As a result of his actions, T.J. Lane and his family faced severe repercussions. Initially, the parents of the deceased students filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Lane's family, which resulted in a $2.7 million settlement. On September 11, 2014, Lane managed to escape from the Allen Correctional Institution in Lima, Ohio, along with 2 older inmates. However, he was recaptured within 24 hours and subsequently transferred to a maximum security prison in the United States, where he endured solitary confinement for up to 23 hours a day. He currently remains incarcerated in a maximum security prison, much like the infamous facility. Number 6, Daniel Villegas. Unlike all the other moments, this one has a certain level of positivity. This is the story of Daniel Villegas, 41, who was accused of capital murder for the deaths of Armando Lazo and Bobby England in 1993. On April 10, 1993, Armando "Mando" Lazo, Bobby England, and 2 other boys were walking home after a high school party when they were shot at. England died near a ditch in the area, while Lazo made his way to a nearby house and rang the doorbell before collapsing. Juan Carlos Medina and Yes Hernandez survived the shooting. At the time, Villegas was only 16 years old and was arrested in connection with the shooting. Upon his arrest, Villegas claimed that El Paso detectives forced him to confess to the murders. He had no lawyer, nor were his parents present, so he did what they asked. Although he tried to retract his statement a few hours later, it became a key piece of evidence in his conviction. In 1994, he underwent an initial trial that ultimately ended in a mistrial due to the jury's inability to reach a unanimous verdict. During his subsequent trial a year later, Villegas was found guilty of capital murder and was subsequently sentenced to life in prison. However, after spending more than 17 years behind bars, the verdict was overturned, and Villegas was released on bail in January 2014. During this period, he got married and became a father of 2 children. However, a third trial was opened for the same case, and if found guilty, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. During the trial, no DNA, forensic evidence, or firearm was presented to link Villegas to the murder. This led the jury to reach a verdict of not guilty. Villegas wept uncontrollably throughout the trial. He was finally exonerated after serving an 18-year prison sentence for a crime he did not commit. Number 5. Jeremy Christian. Jeremy Christian was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist organization in the United States. The KKK has a history of targeting minority groups, including African Americans, Hispanics, Jews, and many others. In May 2017, Jeremy Christian received a life sentence for the murder of 2 passengers on a MAX train. He fatally stabbed these victims after verbally abusing 2 teenage girls, one African American and the other a Somali immigrant. According to a witness, Christian unleashed a tirade of hatred against Muslims, Christians, and Jews, even talking about beheadings before shouting, "Go home, we need Americans here." A passenger named Namkai Mesh attempted to record the incident with his phone, which Christian vehemently opposed. He forcibly took Namkai's phone, threw it on the ground, and stomped on it. This altercation escalated into a physical confrontation, during which Jeremy pulled out a knife, resulting in the fatal stabbings of Namkai Mesh and a 53-year-old bystander named Ricky Best. Initially, during his trial, Jeremy Christian seemed remorseful and emotional, apparently trying to gain the judge's sympathy. However, his true nature became evident when he verbally abused the same African American girl he had attacked on the train, making threats, derogatory comments, and expressing regret for not killing her. It was all the judge needed to issue a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 4. Nelson Ortiz Nieves. In December 2017, Nelson Ortiz Nieves was convicted of murdering his girlfriend's son, Giovanni Mejias, whom he lived with and cared for at the time. The child's mother, S. Hernandez, began dating Ortiz a year before the incident, and Ortiz eventually met Hernandez's other children. Upon meeting her children, Ortiz began abusing Giovanni. On July 13, 2017, Giovanni died as a result of this abuse. But Ortiz wasn't the only one to blame in the case. The child's mother was also involved, as they both mistreated Giovanni beyond human comprehension. On the day of his death, Ortiz had beaten him to the point where he was left semi-conscious, lying on the kitchen floor of their home, suffering from internal bleeding. At his hearing, Ortiz Nieves continued to protest his innocence, claiming that he did not abuse or fatally injure Giovanni Mejias but was trying to help him. He also erupted when the judge reviewed the evidence in the trial that led to his conviction. He could not bear to hear the words the judge used to describe him. Sheriff's deputies had to intervene and remove him from the courtroom hallway. When he returned, Ortiz Nieves was calmer as the judge finished sentencing. The presiding judge, Mark Truss, gave Ortiz life without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder and 80 to 150 years in prison. The judge's final words to Ortiz were, "You are the lowest form of human life, you are a monster, and frankly, you are evil. You should never be allowed to get out of prison. You will die in the prison system." On the other hand, the child's mother was not vindicated for her son's death. She was sentenced to between 57 months and 10 years in prison after being found guilty. She seemed to show some remorse during her sentencing, saying, "I lied under oath for a man I thought loved and cared about me.